president of the Children's Media Association. I wanted to extend a warm welcome to our members today, and thank you for joining us. And to those of you who aren't members yet, please consider joining. We are the only organization that works across all media verticals, which gives you a great sense of what's going on in the kids and family space. Our mission is to unite, inform, inspire, and support everyone who creates entertainment for kids and family. As a note, we're a nonprofit organization and we're run by volunteers. So if you get super excited tonight, feel free to jump onto our website and fill out a volunteer form. We'd love to have more people join us. I am honored today to have Jelani Memory, CEO and founder of AKidsCo. Do you say AKidsCo or a kid company? I never asked you that one.
You say AKidsCo or a kids company, either's fine.
With us today. I've been watching your company grow for the last few years and been amazed at what's been happening and how you sort of nurtured this one idea into so much more. So I'd love to start, before we get into that first book, just tell us who you are. Tell us how you grew up and how that shaped who you are today and, has led you on this journey over the last 3 years with your company.
I'm the youngest of 4 kids, born and raised here in Portland, Oregon. As I like to say, the whitest big city in America. That's true, actually, believe it or not. And as a Black kid, often the only Black kid in my classrooms, both in grade school, middle school, high school, I found myself trying to make my own way, trying to figure out my own identity, trying to figure out how to navigate the world and avoid racism, or at least deal with it, as well as, build meaningful friendships, relationships, etc. And life was tumultuous as a kid. Dad left when I was 4. Mom raised us all by herself. And, as much as she worked and as hard as she worked, I was left wanting in a lot of ways, and having conversations like those big, important conversations, sex, drugs, you name it. We just didn't have those when I was growing up. And so, by the time I get to high school, my closest in age sister, who was 15 at the time, got pregnant and I became an uncle. Wow. And I don't tell this story a lot, but I got to learn what fatherhood looked like really early on, having not grown up with a dad, but getting to watch my sister give birth and being an uncle and getting to change diapers, stay up all night with a sick baby. It was really a great crash course. And I realized something then, is that I was sort of built for fatherhood, that I really loved that parental sort of role. And I think that would end up marking me both personally and professionally for the rest of my life.
I can see that for sure. So we'll fast forward a little bit. You got married and you started to have kids. And I think when your 6th child was a baby is when you wrote the first book. And I just was wondering, like, you're looking at your family, you're figuring out life for them, knowing the journey you've been on. And what was it that said, I need to have this conversation in a different way than it happened with me? And so what got you to write that first book?
It turns out, even for kids who grow up with 2 parents who are in the home talking to them all the time, there are still topics that they avoid. And I sort of made a pact for myself with my own kids, is that I was going to try and have every conversation too early instead of too late. And so that meant we had a lot of zany, crazy, important, uncomfortable conversations. And when my wife and I got married, I brought my little Black daughter with me. She was 4 at the time. My wife brought 4 kids with her, very white. So sort of Brady Bunch style, blended our 2 families together, and then had our son Solomon together. When I would go pick up my kids from school, there was a very sort of obvious difference in race. And it was so important to me that my kids learn how to navigate that and not feel afraid or unsure or uncomfortable, especially when it came to talking about their own skin color and mine. I wanted them to be able to ask questions. And so that really became the catalyst for my book. And I just am convinced nobody believes me that it was really just a project for them, but it was a project for my kids, because it was that important for me to put together something for them that validated that it was okay for them to talk to me about my own experience with racism,
Mhm.
that it was important for me to understand, for them to understand my experience with racism, and for my white kids to not be that kid in the classroom or on the team or at the play who would say that thing to a kid of color and make them feel uncomfortable or unwanted or insignificant. And for my Black kids, I wanted them to be able to have a word for what was happening to them when racism popped up, because I didn't have that word growing up.
Right.
I didn't have that understanding until I got much older. And so putting together the book, it was a fun personal project that, like, spelling errors and all, I printed it. Um, because what was the worst that could happen? My kids would criticize my spelling, right? And it was my kids who saw sort of the forest for the trees. I'm like, Dad, this is
How
really
interesting.
cool. You should make more.
Mhm.
And I just genuinely, I didn't see it until they said it, and I was like, oh yeah, you're totally right. Because I don't know if anybody else is going to make books like this that talk as honestly and specifically
And
and
boldly, yeah,
and
yeah.
boldly. And so that sort of planted a seed that started to grow in a really meaningful way.
So your kids said, Dad, you need to make more. But obviously more, I don't think they envisioned what that first step was like to get to where you are today. So you make the first book and it takes off like wildfire, correct? Like when you launched that first book.
Yeah, well, the timing is sort of interesting. So I
Yeah.
make this first book and I've got one copy. And so my kids have this remarkable response to it. It's like, Dad, this is cool. And it starts unlocking all these cool new conversations with them. Not even about racism, about all these other difficult
Right.
topics. And so as just a test, I started to show it to other adults. Sort of go, what do
Mm.
you think of my little book? And they had the same response every single time. They look at it and go, oh my God, this is amazing. Can I take it home and read it to my kid? And I would always go, well, why would you want to do that? And like, well, I don't know how to start this conversation.
Right.
Maybe this book will help. And has again, just like a real hammer on the head light bulb moment of going, oh, other parents don't know how to talk about this too. Like they're not sure what to say.
Yeah.
And especially for my white friends, there's like, I don't want to screw my kid up. So if you made this
Exactly.
thing, maybe it'll give us a head start, right? And so, you know, a month went by, 2 months, 3 months. I'm carrying my little grubby one copy book around. Um, and two things that are really pivotal happen. One, I'm sitting in a coffee shop waiting for a friend to show up, and a woman walks by and she goes, "Where can I buy that book?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And she goes, "Where can I buy that book?" And I go, "What book?" And she goes, "That book." And I was like, and I just didn't know what to say.
Right.
I was I was like, I've got this one copy. You can't have this copy. It's my copy.
Wait, where was
But
the I'll make you one?
it was this strange feeling of going, I've made a book that can be judged by its cover, and very intentionally so, because I think, you know, we as grownups, I think we often lie to kids or we shade the truth. And I made the book as direct as it could possibly be, hence a kid's book about racism. Like it was like everything you need to know about this book is on the cover. You know, the second thing is I let myself dream a little bit. And I said, I'm not going to make a bunch of books. I'm not going to start a publishing company. But if I did, what books would I make? What conversations have I
Oh,
struggled to have
interesting.
with my kids? What
Okay.
topics make me feel sort of squirmy in my seat? And what things
Mhm.
have my kids asked me about? And I sat down for a half an hour and made a list of over 200 topics. And I just had to stop. I was like, I could keep going.
Right.
There are 1,000, 2,000 conversations that I need to have with my kids that I may never get around to because some of them feel impossible to have. And I want to wait as long as possible to have them. But the reality is I probably should start today. And I still got that little list of mine and we're still chomping through it.
Wow.
But I just thought, you know, if I'm in this boat as a parent, there's got to be other parents who are in that boat as well. There's got to be other teachers, therapists, grandmas, grandpas, aunties, and uncles. And so I started a company, which is
Wow.
which is wild in hindsight. And My book wasn't the one that took off initially. I remember our kids' book about anxiety did really well. Kids' book about creativity that was by a couple good friends of mine. A kids' book about adventure. Really proud of the depression book we did. Really proud
Yeah.
of the cancer book we did. And we launched with so many books, mostly because I wanted to show where I wanted to go with this brand and with this company, that I wanted to cover all the most important, empowering topics that kids either do encounter or need to encounter in their lives. And the rest is history, but so much happened in between then and now.
But I also think like the one thing that struck me when I read your books is the sort of instructions in the very beginning that, and I'll just read it out loud. This book is best read together, grown up and kid. And I just think that that speaks to, at least for me, it spoke to a different audience, that you're not only writing a book to help people understand how to talk about difficult topics and to start those conversations, but you're literally saying, sit down with other people and have this conversation, and that will, help you grow and help you learn. At least that was sort of my takeaway
Yeah.
from all of that. And I think that's
Yeah.
fundamental to who you guys are even today, that you're trying to bring people together to get those conversations going so we can be all more enlightened and more caring and thoughtful about how we treat each other, which is really powerful to me.
100%. And if I could, give some commentary on that,
Yeah.
I think the children's book is like this magic format to be
Yeah.
able to do that. We adults like to pretend we know things that we don't really know. Like, when's the last time you were in a meeting and another grown-up raised their hand and said, I don't know what that word means, right? It's like, it's rare because we're all sort of pretending with each other. Kids are the ones that disrupt that, and they go, well, what do you mean? Or like, where do we go when we die? And we're like, as grown-ups, we're like, who let this kid in here, right? Who gets to ask this question? Like, doesn't he know you can't ask that question? There's no answer to that question. And so the children's book is this wonderful format that children accept and adults accept as this vehicle of story and information, and dare I say truth, right? Even if that truth is the giving tree or dragons love tacos, like, it can be a fun truth. And I hear so much from grown-ups. I read your book to my kid and I learned a lot from reading it. And that makes me hopeful to go, I think it's a format that can break through for not just kids, but for grown-ups too.
Absolutely. I think your narrative format is to, dissect a topic and make people comfortable with what you're actually talking about, which who doesn't need that in today's world? Speaking of today's world, I also think you've had this insane growth over the last 3 years. And I think obviously we all know that a lot of change and a lot of has been going on in our country and even around the world. And I think that at least I would think some of the success that you've experienced is being at the right place, having the right conversations at the right time. And I just commend you for all of that. I mean, no one had that crystal ball to know that was all going to happen, but I love that you've embraced it and you've written more books about topics that are so relevant for now and for today's kids. And I just wonder like what that looks like for you and how you stay on that path and that narrative. I know you have that long list that you want to cover, but how is that shaped and how do you, figure out what is the next best book to publish?
I get asked a lot, like, one, like, how do we choose what topics we write about? How do we choose our authors?
Yeah, that's one
And
of my questions. You know
well,
that.
we'll get there, but it ties into this idea of like, why do we choose to publish the books that we publish? And I can't give you any better answer than it's a gut feeling that we have as a team, as editors, as writers, as designers, for what's happening in our own lives, what happened to us as kids, what's happening out there in the world, and trying to find those sensitive spots, those uncomfortable spots to go, does the nation, does the world, does my community need a book on this topic? And sometimes we find the person first and we discover a topic out of that. And sometimes we go, we've got this topic, we've got to go find a person who can embody this, who can bring authentic experience to it. I'm just as proud of our books that have, gone on to be bestsellers, my book included, because they're reaching tons and tons of kids all over the world, genuinely. I'm really proud of our books that, like, we struggle to sell 1,000 copies, because I know for the communities that those books are going to, they
Right.
really matter a lot. And it's
Yeah.
very unlikely that those books are getting made by other publishers because they tackle really difficult topics. We did a kid's book about Alzheimer's,
Mm.
really incredible book for a very small community, a niche community that's affected and directly impacted by that. We did a kid's book about grief that directly it's like made for kids and families who've lost a loved one. We did, a kid's book about divorce, a kid's book about death, a kid's
Right.
book about depression, and these don't pull punches. They don't try and wrap it in a cuddly story. They speak really honestly about the topics. And look, we don't do those because we think we're going to sell 1 million copies and all
Right.
become millionaires. We do it because from this like existential sort of dread that if we don't, nobody else will.
I love all of it. One thing I wanted to touch on, because I just loved your definition of the word to empower. Your tagline is made to empower. Your mission is to empower a generation of kids through diverse storytelling. But would you share with everyone how you like to define empowerment? Because I just think it's a really wonderful and nurturing description of the word that I hadn't quite seen before.
Well, I'll give you a couple variations. When I was a kid, we were told we could be anything, right? If you want to go to the NBA, you can do that. If you want to go be an astronaut, you can do that. If you want to be a fireman, you can go do that. If you want to be president, go, Jelani, go be president. And what I think I should have been told, and I think we should be telling kids now, is you can be yourself, is you are okay just the way you are.
Yeah.
And those fears and those pains and that the trauma you've gone through, the difficulties, the sadness, the loneliness, all those things are a part of who you are. And you're not abnormal, you're not weird, you're not strange, you're just like everybody else. And to make kids feel seen and feel heard. And out of that, I think through that understanding of who oneself is for kids, they get spurred on, I think, to become their fullest selves and to be as diverse and individual and creative and curious and thoughtful as they have the possibility to be. And so when we think about empowering kids, it's about unlocking that inner self that's trying to hide away or that's worried or that's afraid or thinks they're the only one, and to empower them to truly be themselves.
I like the word that you've used too, which is acceptance, accepting yourself and others too, which
Yeah.
I just love all of that. Okay, so now we'll get on to the author question. You have a book that I just found out about, which I thought was amazing. A book about love with Ziggy Marley. I worked with the Marley family many years ago on their One Love Foundation, and I just think, I've been a huge fan of Bob's music and then the family's music from, Ziggy to Sedella to Skip to any of them, because I think they just have a true narrative into being honest and what love is about and all of that. So I just love to know how you got to Ziggy and how that ended up, or maybe Ziggy found you given all of your success, but also just, I think, we talked about this, the authors that you choose aren't necessarily the ones that people would say, oh, if you want a book about X, choose this person. And I think that's amazing that you're not going that route. So I just love to know a little bit more about your process. And is it organic? Is it how thoughtful, and planning is it? Or does it just sort of the universe bringing people to you?
Yeah, it's a little bit all of the above. We think about our stories a lot, we think about our topics a lot, and we think about people a lot and sort of who should embody those topics. And so early on, it was me begging friends to come publish a book with me. We're gonna write it in a day, and I'm gonna get it out to market in 3 months. And I realized very quickly is that was a compelling pitch, and a lot of people
Mm.
said yes. But I had this very clear criteria in my mind that has only gotten tighter and more clear over time, which is this individual needs to authentically represent this topic.
Yeah.
That if I were to poll their spouse or one of their friends or someone who knew them from far off, they would inextricably associate this person with this topic. It might not be the most obvious one, but it was
Right.
going to be one where you said, oh, that's perfect, right? And so for a good friend of mine, a mentor, Kevin Carroll, that ended up being belonging. For someone I went to college with, it ended up being depression. For a fellow
Mm.
founder friend of mine who runs this incredible apparel company called Wildfang,
Yeah,
ended
I
up
love
being
the feminism
feminism.
book.
There you go, right? And as soon as you start saying like this person, this topic, people just go, oh, I want that book,
Right.
because that person just oozes the lifeblood of that topic. Um,
Synonymous, yeah.
so when we launched, something really special happened is people immediately saw what we were up to and started saying, oh, you know who should write this book? You
Okay.
should talk with so-and-so. And the criteria wasn't, this person is published and a smart writer and
Right.
those sorts of things, or this person's famous. It was, this person knows this topic. This person has lived and breathed it for
Love it.
35 years. You should come let them tell their story. And I loved the organicness of that.
Yeah.
And then, we'd have individuals reach out and say, hey, I don't know if you're taking pitches, but here's me, and I'd love to tackle this topic. And just like for folks out there, if you're wanting to pitch me a book, like pitch me one idea. If you pitch me 10, it's an automatic no. What I'm looking for is like something that you are inextricably tied to. It's like the one thing, if you could pass it on to the next generation, this would be the one thing. And all of your friend circle would say, oh, they'd be perfect for that. And I'm convinced everybody has one of those, by the way. And so we had these wonderful pitches. A kid's book about empathy, cold pitch. A kid's book about divorce, cold pitch. We had a lot of
Wow.
those. Yeah. And then, a little time goes on, we build a reputation.
Yeah.
And, through people, all of a sudden Billie Jean King calls and it's like, hey, I like what you're doing. Can I make one of these? And I was like, of course, Billie. And there was this funny moment where I realized like, I'm actually pretty principled about this stuff in terms of the topics that people get to tackle. And so Billie's team's like, Billie thinks she wants to talk about this. And I was like, no, I don't want to make that book. I was like, that's not interesting. And I go, it's not a challenging topic. And I also go, that's not Billie. I go, she might want to write about that, but I go, Billie has a legacy of equality. I go, she's fought for her entire life.
Entire life, yeah.
Because that's the one word that I associate with her. She's got to do that topic. And so I twisted her arm and she did that book, and it came out really incredible. Love with Ziggy Marley, obvious. Imagination with LeVar Burton, obvious. Yeah. We've even gotten to do some wonderful books with brands. So we did a public speaking book with the TED organization.
I saw your TED Talk.
there we go. So for how do we choose these folks? We as a team sort of exist in the universe and are seeking out sort of people to tell specific stories. We are reading every email that comes in and trying to sift through to try and find those. And then, really trying to keep our finger on the pulse for what's happening in specific communities around the world. And every once in a while, something sort of presses up against, I think, the public consciousness enough that we just realize, let's just make something. Let's take the economics out of it and let's put it out there for free. So a kid's book about war was made in 5 days
Wow.
within days of the conflict breaking out in Ukraine. Because I had my kids going, what's happening? Like,
right.
is our country going to war? Right. We did it for a kid's book about anti-Asian hate when there was a string of racist murders in the Atlanta area, when lockdowns happened for COVID-19.
Right.
It was the very first time we were like, we can make a book really fast. We should just make one and not worry about making money, but worry about helping kids navigate this really difficult moment. And if we do our job there, the rest of the stuff will just sort of sort itself out, and we'll figure out how to get some emails or some clicks to the website or something like that, or do some retargeting, remarketing. But otherwise, like, we are in a position to do a thing that maybe Penguin Random House can't. Maybe Simon and Schuster would struggle at, but we can do, and it's in our wheelhouse. And so we think about that when it comes to finding authors to bring somebody into that. I mean, it's a huge ask. Come make a book with us. You're not going to make any money, neither are we, and we're going to tackle an impossible subject, and we're going to do it in 5 days, right? So like, it's a huge ask. We have yet to receive a no when we reach out for those, opportunities, because it's so important.
Okay, can you share any no's that bummed you out that you didn't get?
Here's the thing. I have yet to get a straight no from somebody who I wanted to do a book with. We are saying no a lot, which breaks my heart, but we have to. We can't publish every book.
Yeah.
I'm like real serious about doing a book with Barack and Michelle Obama. Like we just have to.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just throw that out into the universe again and again. And look, here's what I want to happen is I want them to come knocking on our door and go, we want to make a book with you because we think this book needs to get made. Nobody else is going to make it. And we want it to be accessible to every kid out there. Look, I don't know what that's about. That could be patience. That could be courage. I'm just like giving my playbook away, by the way.
No, I love it. I love
It could be a
it.
number of things, but to me, there's something about our humanity and us as individuals where we end up embodying an idea or topic.
Mhm.
And if there's a weak book in all the books, it's my book. Like look, I probably embody creativity or risk taking or a whole number of topics better than I embody racism. But I think what qualified me to do racism was it was my entire
You lived it.
whole life lived experience. And in that way, it gave me a lot of humility when I went to go find other authors, that I realized they don't have to be scholarly. They don't have to have gone to college for this. They don't have to have the credentials. They just need the experience.
Yeah.
They need to have lived this thing. And one of my favorite stories is I found this incredible young woman. She was 14 years old when she did the book with us. I think she's 60 now. Her name's Elizabeth, and she wrote a kid's book about bullying with us. She has ataxic cerebral palsy, so her speech is really limited. And she would get bullied relentlessly in middle school, so much so that she became a bully in her own right, and had found herself on the other side of both of those experiences with a really clear perspective on what it feels like to be bullied and why bullies bully. And I just thought, this teenager is going to do this book better than anybody else in the world. I have to have her do it. Not because she can write well, not because she's credentialed, not because she's even finished high school, right? But because she's embodied that experience in such an incredible way.
Wow, that's amazing. So powerful. Quick zig, your speed to market, 3 months, like beginning to end or less? Is that published on shelf?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was an early decision. So let me walk folks through sort of like,
please do. Yeah.
well, look, and I don't want to throw any arrows. Okay. So if you're in the publishing world, forgive me. And look, I get it. It takes a long time to publish a book because of the sales cycles and the way that Amazon and bookstores and Barnes and Noble and, Target. Exactly. Right. So I get it. But for us, we were like, what if we could just do an end run around all that? Okay. So what do you need in that place? What you need a really fast writing model. So that's our workshop method, right? 1 day writing process, 5 hours. We've done it over 100 times. It's incredible. It works every time. And it's a lot of fun. Next is we're going to design everything in house, right? And when I say design, I mean design, not illustrate. Our books aren't really illustrated. They're sparse on illustration, heavy on design, type, layout, color. So we're going to do that in-house. We're also going to edit in-house so we go really fast. And we're also going to like cut off the author at a certain point. The workshop's going to be their primary participation. But after that, we're going to take the book and we're going to run with it. And we're going to say, hey, trust us. Okay. Your job is not to write, right? Your job is not to edit. Your job is to bring your life experience and your story. And we're going to do right by you in bringing that to market as quickly as possible. So you're not waiting 2 years, you're waiting 2 months. And so we try and wrap that book within about 30 days from that workshop. And then we send it to print. Every once in a while we do that faster. Like for LeVar's book, that was 7 weeks from workshop to in customers' hands, which was a lot of fun. And we have this really wonderful channel, direct to consumer. And that was a big part of how I built the business early on was let's have a direct connection with our audience, with our customers. Let's make sure that we can tell them about new books, right? When we make them. So we have their email address, those sorts of things like that.
Which
And
is
what's
how I
great
got
is
the Ziggy one.
exactly. What's great is we can go direct to consumer immediately. And then we start to go to our, independent bookstores right after that. Then it's libraries and schools. And then it's those longer lead Barnes and Nobles, big box stores, broader distribution, international, those sorts of things. We're not perfect at it, but look, it's how we've published so many books so quickly, been able to tell such a variety and diversity of stories. And what's really beautiful is when something happens in the world, we can produce something really quickly and get it into kids' hands.
Which I think, given the way retail is right now, understanding your primary is direct to consumer, but given the way retail is right now, a smart retailer would go, okay, we have a topic, we need to call Jelani and get this on shelf because that's going to be a driver, So
Yeah.
anyway, old retail days there. All right, so we are at 85 books now, 3 years later. And you start to think, well, not now, you've had them for a while, but you transition into podcasts. Tell me about that decision and how that has changed the company and turned you into a media company. But like, what does that do? Extend the conversation, deepen the conversation? How is that all playing into the narrative for the company?
This company it's quite autobiographical. Like a lot of it comes from, I have this experience. Why don't we make something because of it? I'm a podcast nerd. I've been listening to podcasts since they were on iPods, like genuinely. And my kids, when I introduced them to the podcast, they fell in love with them. We were listening to like the unexplained disappearance of Mars Patel, the ghost of Jessica Majors, both podcasts by Gen Z Media, by the way.
Yeah.
So shout out to them. And I just watched how they engaged with it. And it did something really interesting in a way, like interesting in a way that I saw Netflix didn't really do. It engaged their imaginations, right? Instead of seeing that blank look on a kid's face when they're like doing screen time, you saw their brain was just firing and coming alive. And I remember we'd get to school and there'd be like 5 minutes left in an episode and they'd be like, wait, we gotta wait till it finishes, right?
Drive around the block, Dad.
And so I was hopeful that could be a medium that we could take our method of storytelling through this sort of nonfiction, let's talk up to kids and not down to them, and teach them about something important in the world. And so in true fashion, we went quick to market. We made a bunch of shows, now 13 overall, on things like climate change. We did with two young climate activists from Brown University. We had an 8-year-old host a podcast on activism where he interviews other young activists called The Activators. Got a really wonderful show called Is That True? With a really wonderful professor and reporter who tackles misinformation, but through a STEM and sort of factual approach. For all those, it's been about how do we tell more stories? How do we reach more kids? Because I love the idea that podcasts are free. And then lastly, like, how do we extend those conversations, right? Because a book is one place to have it, but it's this fixed thing, right? Whereas a podcast is a way to continue to bring nuance and more voices and honestly, a lot of speed to the storytelling process.
Well, and I love that you had kids as the host of these. I think kids sharing and, speaking about topics as you have in the books, you're talking between an adult and a child, actually having a child come to life in a podcast, amazing texture to the whole conversation as well.
Yeah.
And then should we talk about the Better Grown-Ups podcast too?
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, that's been a really fun. It's amazing it took us this long to get to it. So Better Grownups is a parenting podcast hosted by yours truly. And the whole conceit is like, look, if kids are ready, then we need to be better grownups to like meet where they're at truly. And if they're going to build the future that they deserve, like we need to make sure we don't get in their way. And so I get to talk with other grownups, professionals, thinkers, thought leaders, icons, about how they grew up, about how they were parented, about how they parent or navigate the world where kids are in it. And one, it's just been enriching for me to get to host that podcast. It's made me a better father for sure. But we also don't pull any punches. And so that same approach that we bring to story with our books, we try and talk as candidly and honestly as we can. And then, hey, look, like podcasts are in a very diverse space. And so for me to be looking like I do and hosting a parenting podcast, that's rare. And the fact of the matter is that shouldn't be rare. And so we're hoping to do more projects in the parenting space.
Love that. Really love that. Okay, so we now have books, we have podcasts, and then a deal has been announced of, working with the Henson Company. Can you share anything? Tell us what's going on. I know there's a little bit of a breakdown about how the show could be, but where are you in that process, and when can we look forward to seeing a show from you guys?
Yeah, I'll just keep talking about the show until, men in black suits show up and say, stop talking about our show. No, I mean, look, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, like, we've made these really remarkable cutting edge books that sort of say things that grownups are afraid to say to themselves, but they say them to kids. We knew there was something there for the television world, and so we waited for the right partner to come along. And look, the Jim Henson Company was like the perfect partner. I just could not have imagined somebody better. So we struck a deal for developing a scripted show together. And so we're full on like developing that show. We've got showrunner on, really excited to start going out and pitching it. And look, the hope is that it'll be as candid and as honest and as real as our books are, but also as empowering and as enriching and as funny and thoughtful and creative and diverse as our books are as well.
All right, one last question, and then we will open it up to questions. So we have books, we have podcasts, now we have content in terms of media content, series. Are there other things on the horizon that you're looking to get into, or is your plate completely full and you're like, okay, let me get through this?
I don't even know if you know about this. So we did a parenting book. Let's see if it'll focus on
Oh,
it.
I did. I saw that, the 100 diverse. Yeah. I saw that.
Yeah. So it's a book, but it's a different book. Like, it's 312 pages. We brought together 100 diverse voices to talk about their experience in becoming a parent. And it tackles everything from, like, how to deal with annoying in-laws to breastfeeding, bottle feeding, your own mental health, postpartum depression. We hope it becomes the de facto parenting book that every new parent gets. Look, I'm really interested in the documentary space. I think there's some really interesting stories that can get told there. Like, I remember when Bowling for Columbine came out and how much it changed the conversations about guns in America. And I go, where's that documentary now? Like, where's the version of that now for Gen Z kids that can sort of change and move the conversation? And so we're really interested in using that as a way to communicate to both grownups and kids. We're exploring the unscripted space from a television perspective. And a lot of our podcasts, there's a lot of legs to be able to adapt them there. And then, there's been whispers about potentially some retail of our own. I'm really in love with the idea of owning a bookstore. Like,
we need bookstores. There's not enough bookstores.
There's not enough bookstores. Yeah. And look, living here in Portland, Oregon, I don't know if you know, but the largest independent bookstore in the world, Powell's Books, is here. It's literally an entire city block. It's 3 stories tall. It's incredible. It's like book Mecca. So if you want to, have a really wonderful experience, come to Portland. I just think there's something that can be done in retail that's really hard to reduplicate. And we see it again and again when we go to events with our books and people go, I had no idea you had so many books. These are incredible. How much are they? So I know how many I can buy, right? And we love the idea of taking that and planting that within a community and then creating a context for our authors, who, by the way, are not authors by trade, right? They're kids, school teachers, right? Professionals, they're all sorts of things. Exactly, musicians, and create a context where they can come and share their story and talk about their book. Like, we love that idea too. So fingers crossed, we can sort of find the economics there to make a bookstore.
I love that. Experiential retail. Get everyone in there and have those conversations too. That's lovely.
Yeah. So look, we're going to keep writing and telling stories and finding all the nooks and crannies that we can place them in. And when I think about our business, I think about trying to fill the shoes that Fred Rogers left behind. And I don't mean that for myself personally, but I mean that from the legacy that got left for like every millennial adult can point back to Fred Rogers, even if they didn't watch the show, as him having an impact, right? The way that he spoke up to kids. And so we want to continue that on. But for the generation that is like growing up with a smartphone and TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and the world's information at their fingertips, there's a kind of candidness and honesty that you need to bring to a kid like that, that has changed, a lot in the last 20 to 30 years. But that's how we think about our business. I hope we get to do that. I hope we get to live long enough to do that. And I also I want to make it diverse as hell. I want more storytellers who look like me to get to participate in that.
Love that. All right, we will open it up to questions, Caroline.
I can start us off with a question. It says, there are so many important topics that you're covering. Which topics or issues do you think are underserved with respect to attention and conversation? So ones that you already have published.
Disabilities. That was a really wonderful book we did with ESL sixth grade teacher named Christine Napper. I have never been so humbled in making one of our books and realizing how little I knew about folks with disabilities, about our country's history, and how they've treated folks with disabilities. I was just absolutely humbling. That book for me was a really revelatory experience. We're hoping to do more stuff around money. Again, money is one of those things that everybody pretends they understand. Very few people do, and myself included. We did a book recently with a really wonderful brand called Billy, titled A Kid's Book About Body Hair. It's designed specifically for young girls, just navigating the stigma around having body hair at all. And the message in the book is loud and clear, is body hair is normal and you are okay just the way that you are. And that's a conversation that happens, but it often happens behind closed doors. And I'm not sure if anybody in the kids media world is thinking about that or making media around that.
I'll advocate for one. I don't think you have this one. I was just doing a quick check, but my daughter was recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So our family went through a whole shift in life and everything. So a book to understand diabetes and the stigma, I think, that comes with diabetes would be amazing too. Just putting that one out there.
I agree. I agree. Some that are on our radar that we think will be important to do in the future. I'll just list them off. Chronic illness, sickle cell, I agree, diabetes, ADHD, dyslexia. And then, I remember being in an Uber, heading to some meeting in another state at one point, and I was explaining to the Uber driver what I did, because he asked, and I was like, well, we make these books on these topics. And he goes, is there a book that you'd never do?
Oh,
is there a
good question.
topic that you'd never cover? And I said, honestly, I don't think there is. And I go, for the very reason that if we don't think we should cover it, it probably means that we should. If it feels that uncomfortable,
right,
there's likely some kid somewhere who needs that story. And I remember very notably, he was like, well, but you couldn't do one on abortion. You can't bring that up with kids. And I thought, well, we kind of have to, because if we don't, where is the children's media on abortion? It just doesn't exist, because it seems too taboo, too impossible to talk about, too fraught. And for us, those are places where we like to lean in and go, there's got to be a way to talk to kids about it, because the reality is if they are alive and have access to, the internet, they're running up against these, if they have access to grownups and other kids and school, they're running up against these ideas, these words. And so creating a context where there's a conversation feels really important to us.
Love that.
So we have another question that asks, what is the key in bringing the conversation to kids?
The first thing is honesty. And that can be honesty in what you know, but it is also honesty in what you don't know. That's where most grownups get tripped up. If they don't know something, they'll pass the conversation off till later and pretend like they do, but the kid's not ready for it. Instead of saying, kid asks, if you get cancer, can you die? Right? Instead of saying, I don't know, or maybe, or you say, you lean in and you go, let's find out together. Right. And go on that discovery journey together. That's really what our books create, is that shared learning environment. So I think that's the key. And then recognizing your baggage, which I think is like, you have to recognize your baggage as a grown-up before you can start to undo that baggage. But some of these conversations, they just genuinely make grown-ups too uncomfortable to even have, even if the kid's totally ready, they're totally asking in a really sort of thoughtful way. And so if you can recognize that baggage, then you can start to unpack, why does this make me so uncomfortable when my kid brings it up or addresses it, or when I know it's going to be a conversation we have to have?
Yeah, I agree.
The next one was, so Lottie asked, are there some topics that you might want to pick up more than once? So ones that you've already published but would do again because they're so expansive. She was thinking of topics such as home that can be told from so many different perspectives.
There's a few avenues or ways that we've thought about this. Early on in the collection, it was about sort of trying to get some width and breadth to the collection to sort of show all these topics in all these areas. And then, I remember we got into the summer of 2020 and I realized, like, my book tells just a small part of the story, a kid's book about racism. We need to go deeper in some ways. So we brought on 2 new authors and made books that summer. One was a kid's book about systemic racism, goes much deeper. One was a kid's book about white privilege. Another was a kid's book about voting, which, voting in this country has been tied to race and racism in so many ways. And so those became ways to tackle some of the same things, but from different perspectives or along different lenses. And look, the company itself and the stories that we tell, they're inherently one viewpoint that can be done from many viewpoints. It's why it's a kid's book about racism. It's not the kid's book about racism, right? Or the kid's book about, as we think there's space to go be more expansive there. Now, there's just the practical sort of tactical marketing aspect where it's like, you can't have 2 books with the same title and 2 different authors. Right? It's like, you just can't, there's no way to market that. And so finding another way into it by creating variation on the title or variation on the subject or sequelizing it. And so we've explored some of that, but I still feel like we're scratching the surface to just cover the breadth and width of topics that I think we need to.
Just, gives you a long runway to keep going and doing more and more books and topics.
Yeah. Well, and if I could just give away where I want to end up, where I want to end up is I want to make a platform where anybody can tell their story. Like, I don't want to have a monopoly on here's who gets to make a kid's book about. I think in the same way that I made a story and printed a single copy for my kids, I'd love to empower anybody to be able to do that for their loved ones, for their community, for themselves, to tell their own story. And I don't think it's impossible. Like, we write all of our books in a single day. Like, there's AI meets Mad Libs meets software meets personal story, right? Way to do that. Because we all have a story to tell. I genuinely believe that. And it's about unlocking that story for folks to be able to share with others.
We'll wait for the AKidsCo conference where people descend on you to write their story and you get like 50 books in a day. That would be amazing.
That'd be wonderful. And kids too. Like, my kids, one of their first responses was, can I make one too? Yeah. Because every kid feels like they're an expert at something. And the reality is they are, right? Whether that be ice cream or sadness, Yeah.
Well, and I think kids are so, as an adult, we'll second guess ourselves. I would imagine that the books that a kid would write would be the most authentic and just raw and real and, all the things we really need to be doing. So,
yeah. By the way, we said this book right here, I don't know if folks can see it, a kid's book about leadership. We did, Orion Jean was 10 years old when we wrote it with him. Wow. And I remember every time we put adults on a Zoom call with Orion, they'd all go like, who is this kid? Like, where did this kid come from? Because his parents would be there with him because they're just like responsible parents, but they would never say a word. It was just this 10-year-old kid like schooling us on like everything, right? And we'd all get off the call going like, we're all going to work for this kid someday. Like, he's this incredible young Black boy. And so we brought him on, we did that book. And then a year later, he won Times Kid of the Year because he's that amazing.
That kid, right? Wow. Oh, that's amazing.
So at the moment, is it mostly US based? And if so, do you plan on reaching any families in other countries anytime soon, or has that already happened?
Yeah, it's mostly US based. We've got a pretty decent contingent in Canada, with some direct to consumer sales there, as well as a decent wholesale sales in the UK and Australia. So obviously all English speaking countries. We are cooking on something that we think will take our books global. Well, we don't think, we know they will. So we're really excited about that. We can't really talk about it, but it's going to supercharge what we're doing from a publishing perspective. It's like all the traditional things we just never got around to doing. And so now all those things are going to get layered on top of the business, and something really excited that we'll probably announce next year.
Such
That
a
will
tease. I
bring,
love that.
yeah, translation, distribution, like all sorts of really fun, cool stuff.
How much of your sales are Kindle books? Are they mostly you selling the hard copies? Is it
Mostly the hard copies. Yeah.
which I love, yeah.
Like my litmus test is like when you're putting your 7-year-old to sleep, you know, do you bust out a tablet or do you want a physical thing? And
The flip,
nothing, yeah, nothing replaces that physical thing you can hold and the kid can return to. It's a magical talisman that unlocks so much. I've never seen a smartphone do that same sort of thing. I've never seen a tablet do it. I've never seen a Kindle reader do it. And so I always think it'll be a big part of it, but the ebooks create accessibility. It means they can go around the globe and be available to anyone. And then, you know, look, when we do those free books, we make them available as EPUB and Kindle and PDFs. And when the really tragic shooting happened in Uvalde, we made our kids' book about school shootings available for free. And in 24 hours, you know, 30,000 copies of those went out the door digitally. And it's like, that we just couldn't have done that from a physical capacity perspective, you know.
Do you then publish those ones as well, or are those, or do some just live in a digital format?
I think we always eventually publish those, and sometimes those become charitable vehicles,
Yeah.
ways that we create, you know, economics as a give back strategy, or just to respect the author and their time and their story and what they put into it. For a kids' book about school shootings, we not only did that book with Crystal Woodman Miller, who was a survivor from the Columbine shooting, but we also did a kids' book about school shootings for survivors, which is like a book that shouldn't have to exist. But we realized like this is a group of kids that grows bigger and bigger every week, every month, every year. And they need a different book because they've gone through it, right? They don't need a what if, they need a, so this happened, what now, right?
Yeah. They don't need a book on a drill book. I mean, I guess you need to know what to do, but then you're survived and you have guilt with that on some levels too. So absolutely. Oh, that's wonderful.
We have
Okay.
one more question. I love that you're thinking about all of the children's media and ways to engage parents. What was your main way of learning, specifically the writing and publishing industry? But all the vehicles you mentioned, documentaries, retail, and podcasting. So how did you learn about those?
On the publishing side, there's a really wonderful book, and I love shouting this book out. It's called The People's Guide to Publishing. It's written by a guy named Joe Beal. He runs a publisher called Microcosm Publishing, which is like this radical, like book publishing, zine making publisher here in Portland. Like they literally like deliver books on bikes because they're like climate neutral. Like it's like awesome. And that was my crash course on like, how the hell do you publish books? And like, it was really enlightening as I read the book, and I was like, oh, like publishing is probably a bad business. Like not all this stuff's going to work. So what can I keep and what can I get rid of? My background's actually in commercial filmmaking and photography. So I know quite a bit about the filmmaking world, and then podcasts. I've always been sort of a bit of a hobbyist. Ran a film podcast for a while. And in some ways, like I didn't know anything about children's media other than what I consumed or what I tried desperately not to consume with my children, right?
With 6 children.
Yeah, with my 6 children, you know, like, do we really have to watch another episode of Cocomelon? Like, really? Sorry if anybody works on Cocomelon. It's a popular show, so you get all the kudos for that. But you know, trying to find something that felt Pixar level, where you're like, I'd watch this or consume this without my kids around. We thought about that with all of our media to go, can this meet the muster of just being beautiful on its own merits? Which, by the way, there's a singular piece of children's media that I think is the pinnacle Like it doesn't get any better than this. And
And
it's
that
Shel
is?
Silverstein's The Giving Tree.
Oh, yeah.
It is the greatest children's book ever written and illustrated. Because every time I return to that book, it tells me something new. It teaches me something. It's deeply complex, beautiful, thoughtful. All the artifice is stripped away.
Yeah,
Like
simple. Yeah.
it's simple. Yeah. So Shel, he's the man. We're just trying to follow in his footsteps.
I love that. Oh, you're an original. I cannot thank you enough for joining us tonight and doing this conversation. I love what you're doing and everything that you're doing. And just know we're all here cheering you on to see what you do next and learn about your next endeavors. So thank you so much, Jelani.
Much appreciated. Thank you.